Operation Fast and Furious, aside from the name of the film franchise, was also part of Project Gunrunner and became a widespread public disaster for the Obama administration, and especially Attorney General Eric Holder, ATF Director Kenneth E. Melson, and others following the death of a Border Patrol agent and hundreds of others in Mexico. Without any congressional notification, let alone approval or oversight, the Justice Department created a program that they probably believed would help solve the problem of interdicting guns and drugs. The ill-conceived concept was supposed to lead U.S. and Mexican authorities to the criminal drug cartels who had received these weapons. But what really happened? How was Operation Fast and Furious implemented? Who authorized it? Who conducted the operation? Was it illegal? Who, if anyone, was held accountable? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. A meeting was held at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. on October 26, 2009, where Assistant Attorney General Lanny A. Brewer, Deputy Attorney General David W. Ogden, Acting ATF Director Kenneth E. Melson, Drug Enforcement Administration Administrator Michelle Leonhardt, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation Robert Mueller, and the top federal prosecutors in the southwestern border states attended. The concerns were the Mexican drug cartels bringing illegal narcotics and crime across the U.S. southern border. The border state officials were feeling the impact. In their wisdom, they adopted a tactic to identify and eliminate entire arms trafficking networks rather than low-level buyers. Those attending this meeting apparently did not suggest using the gun-walking tactic, but Phoenix ATF supervisors would soon use it in an attempt to achieve the desired goals. The strategy focused on identifying and eliminating the pipelines that moved the weapons. The goal was to bring down the trafficking network, not just the people on the lowest rung. The next day in Phoenix, the plan was given to Bill Newell, the 20-year veteran and head of ATF's Phoenix office. However, the ATF in Arizona had already been using this policy for at least 7 months, without any congressional approval, long before the federal officials approved the plan. The reasoning was that an arrest of a straw purchaser, which is someone who can legally buy a gun and to sell it to someone who cannot, would not get ATF the bigger fish. The buyer would get a light punishment, if any, and the cartel could just find another buyer. But not immediately arresting the straw buyers, the agents could follow them and their associates, wiretapping conversations, and possibly charge them with serious crimes such as conspiracy, drug trafficking, and money laundering. Under ATF rules, the program was allowed, supported by U.S. Attorney Dennis K. Burke in Phoenix, and had been approved and funded by a task force at the Justice Department, although this later would be denied. The following month in November 2009, Newell's agents in Group 7, one of the squads in the office, began following a particularly busy suspected gun trafficker. In 24 days, he bought 34 firearms. The next month, the man and his associates bought 212 more. The ATF had been following over 24 suspected straw purchasers, and the major common denominator was that they were taking the weapons and storing them at an auto repair shop. Those working there were also active in street racing as a hobby, hence the nickname Fast and Furious being attached to the operation. The operational method was tracking and surveillance of suspected straw buyers, seeing where the guns went, who they were given to, but agents were not to interdict, question, or arrest anyone. Most of the ATF agents were rather unhappy with these instructions as they knew where the weapons were eventually going. The undercover agents tracking the buyers and weapons found themselves in a moral dilemma. For example, ATF agent John Dodson, a 7-year veteran of the ATF, was with 18-year veteran agent Alindo Casa, and they observed a suspected trafficker. He bought 10 semi-automatic rifles from a Phoenix gun store and followed him to the house of another suspected trafficker. When they radioed the event in order to effect an arrest, they were ordered to allow the guns to go, no arrest or interference. The agents were bewildered. They would watch this same method of operation continue continuously for over a year, where they could do absolutely nothing. "We were all sick to death when we realized what was going on," Casa later testified. Arguments ended in screaming and threats by supervisors. Many weapons ended up in the hands of the Sinaloa drug cartel and others. Such was the method of Operation Fast and Furious, which was called gun walking. The logic was that each weapon was recorded by serial number and a ballistics test for later identification. And each weapon was also fitted with a small GPS tracking unit initially installed by the El Paso Intelligence Center, later purchased at a local electronics shop by the ATF. Critically, the GPS battery life was only a few days, and the GPS weapons tracker signal was routinely lost, especially in the trunks of cars. This lack of technical sophistication and failure of GPS as a tracker were the major reasons for Fast and Furious's failure as an ATF operation. And it was not just the GPS tracker power failures. Many of the guns were inspected by the criminals themselves, and the trackers were found. By the time the operation was terminated, over 2,000 weapons of all varieties, such as AK-47 variants, AR-15s, many handguns, and even Barrett 50 caliber sniper rifles. Morale within the ATF was apparently quite low as a result, since many of the agents had been sent in from outside Phoenix and were working together for the first time under David Voth, a Marine Corps veteran and new supervisor sent in from Minnesota. The agents' outrage overrode any sense of loyalty to their bosses. The agents involved had their hands tied and could not get involved in stopping the guns flowing south, and many openly discussed their reservations as to what damage may be done as a result. The agents in downtown Phoenix clashed with Voth and the agent running the case, Hope McAllister, who they felt ignored their concerns. However, Voth struck back at the open dissent and lack of enthusiasm, and in a March 2010 email, he wrote, "I will be damned if this case is going to suffer due to petty arguing, rumors, or other adolescent behavior. I don't know what all the issues are, but we are all adults and we're all professionals, and we have an exciting opportunity to use the biggest tool in our law enforcement toolbox. If you don't think this is fun, you are in the wrong line of work. Period." Their problems were not isolated to the ATF in Arizona. Across the border, ATF agents stationed in Mexico were also concerned, such as Darren Gill, the ATF attaché to Mexico, and his deputy Carlos Canino, who were alarmed by the large number of weapons being recovered at bloody crime scenes throughout Mexico and being traced back to Phoenix. The rising violence in Mexico due to the guns being in the hands of the cartels was a serious wake-up call. Gill himself was frustrated as the weapons collected at crime scenes were traced back to the operation. "Hey, when are they going to shut this, to put it bluntly, damned investigation down?" Gill recalled yelling at his boss. "We're getting hurt down here." In May 2010, Dodson asked his supervisors whether they were prepared to attend the funeral of a slain agent or officer after he or she was killed with one of those straw-purchased firearms. Dodson later told a congressional committee that Voth responded to the complaints by saying, "If you are going to make an omelet, you need to scramble some eggs." Voth denied making that statement or that Dodson raised the possibility of slain agents, said a law enforcement official involved in the case who has been instructed by his superiors not to talk to the media about the case. The official also described both Voth and McAllister as hardworking and conscientious agents. The ATF and Justice Department never informed the Mexican government of the operation because it was not congressionally sanctioned, nor was it officially approved by the White House. Mexico, in fact, knew nothing of the 15-month operation until it became public knowledge. However, a tragedy did eventually strike when, late on the evening of December 14, 2010, U.S. Border Patrol agent and former Marine Brian Terry and other officers were patrolling Peck Canyon in the Arizona desert about 11 miles inside the Mexican border. Suddenly, the group got into a firefight with 5 suspected illegal immigrants. At first, Terry and the officers fired less than lethal beanbag guns, an FBI report said, but the suspects fired assault weapons. Then the agents resorted to live ammunition. Terry was fatally shot in the melee. Investigators made 4 arrests and found 2 AK-47 semi-automatic rifles nearby. Within hours, the news spread inside the ATF. The serial numbers on the 2 rifles matched guns bought by one of the Fast and Furious suspects a year before outside Phoenix. The bullet that killed Terry was so damaged that neither of the firearms could be definitively linked to his killing, according to a law enforcement official connected to the case. After Terry's death, Dodson said he tried to contact ATF headquarters, ATF's chief counsel, the ATF ethics section, and the Justice Department's Office of the Inspector General. One of his complaints was the gun-walking situation, and on December 22nd, an item appeared on cleanupatf.org, a site founded by dissident ATF agents. The post said that an ATF official in Phoenix approved more than 500 AR-15 type rifles to be walked to Mexico. It has been assumed that the Obama administration quietly approved the smuggling operation without consulting Congress, but with the knowledge and assistance of Attorney General Eric Holder. Their aim was to boost the numbers of U.S. weapons recovered in Mexico to gain support for an assault weapons ban, which the Democrats had always campaigned on without actually clarifying what an assault weapon even is. Fast and Furious became known when U.S. Attorney Burke called a news conference in Phoenix to announce a 53-count indictment involving 20 suspects. The indictment alleged that from September 2009 to December 2010, the suspects bought hundreds of firearms to be illegally exported to Mexico. The fallout was almost immediate. Newell was also at the press conference and called Fast and Furious a phenomenal case. The largest ever Mexican gun trafficking investigation, a direct answer to the call to stem the flow of firearms south of the border. But then a quick-thinking local reporter asked Newell about the rumors that ATF agents had purposely allowed firearms to enter Mexico. His direct answer was, hell no. And Newell said that they could not follow everyone and that sometimes suspects would elude agents, which could result in guns getting into Mexico. Unfortunately for Newell, Peter Forcelli, an ATF group supervisor in the Phoenix office, watched the news conference on television. I was appalled, he later testified to Congress, because it was a blatant lie. 2 days later, Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, the ranking minority member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, wrote to the acting ATF Director, Kenneth E. Melson, asking whether the gun-walking allegations were true. An answer came from Assistant Attorney General for Legislative Affairs Ronald Welch, who relied on ATF for his information. He stated the allegation that ATF sanctioned or otherwise knowingly allowed the sale of assault weapons to a straw purchaser who then transported them into Mexico is false. The ATF was caught in a lie, and Grassley knew it and wanted the documents from the Justice Department in order to either prove or disprove justice being directly involved, or if the ATF had gone rogue and ran its own operation. Attorney General Eric Holder refused, which meant that he was in fact aware of the operation despite his protestations. Otherwise, he would have said, I did not authorize the operation, and President Barack Obama would not have needed to invoke executive privilege over the issue. It appeared that gun advocates say federal officials came up with Fast and Furious to pin border crimes on gun dealers. Their opponents say the National Rifle Association ginned up the scandal to distract from border violence. From the report, the major issues in contention are listed below that, showing the evolution of Fast and Furious and the results and the fallout. October 2009, Operation Fast and Furious starts to take shape in the Phoenix office of the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the agency within the Justice Department charged with enforcing federal gun laws. In another case of major fallout, on January 30, 2010, a commando of at least 20 hitmen parked themselves outside a birthday party of high school and college students in Villas de Salvacar in Ciudad Juarez. Near midnight, the assassins, later identified as hired guns for the Mexican cartel La Línea, broke into a one-story house and opened fire on a gathering of nearly 60 teenagers. Outside, lookouts gunned down a screaming neighbor and several students who had managed to escape. 14 young men and women were killed and 12 more were wounded before the hitmen finally fled. Indirectly, the United States government played a role in the massacre by supplying some of the firearms used by these cartel murderers. 3 of the high-caliber weapons fired that night in the Villas de Salvacar were linked to a gun tracing operation run by the ATF, according to a Mexican Army document obtained exclusively by Univision News. Univision News identified a total of 57 more previously unreported firearms that were bought by straw purchasers monitored by ATF during Operation Fast and Furious, and then recovered in Mexico in sites related to murders, kidnappings, and at least one other massacre. It was learned that ATF allowed 1,961 guns to walk out of the U.S. in an effort to identify the high-profile cartel leaders who received them. The agency eventually lost track of the weapons, and they often ended up in the hands of Mexican hitmen, including those whom ordered and carried out the attack on the Salvacar and El Albion, a rehabilitation center in Ciudad Juarez, where 18 young men were killed on September 2, 2009. According to documents obtained by Univision News, from October of that year to the end of 2010, nearly 175 weapons from Operation Fast and Furious inadvertently armed the various warring factions across northern Mexico. Jose Wall, an ATF agent stationed in Tijuana from 2009 to 2011, told Univision News, quote, "Many weapons across the border and enter Mexico, but that Fast and Furious number, quantity, and type of weapons had quite an impact in the war in this area." But Agent Brian Terry's death was unique and led to questions from reporters, gun rights bloggers, and lawmakers about the ATF's tactics. In February, Holder asked for a review by the Justice Department's Inspector General. A federal grand jury later indicted at least 6 men in Terry's death. At least 2 were in custody, and on August 30, 2011, Holder reassigned Melson to an unrelated job without legal policy, and Dennis Burke, the U.S. Attorney for Arizona, resigned. Those were the first 2 men to lose their jobs as a result of the uproar over Fast and Furious, raising the stakes for other Obama administration officials tied to the operation. Representative Darrell Issa, the Republican chairman of the House of Representatives Oversight Committee responsible for rooting out wrongdoing in government agencies, said that he will continue to lead an inquiry into the operation to ensure that blame isn't offloaded on just a few individuals. Burke had questioned the motives of congressional staff, calling them willing stooges for the gun lobby in emails that later became public. Burke apologized, but he still resigned. On December 11, 2011, the Justice Department reacted to a letter that it sent to Congress on February 4th, in the early days of questions about Fast and Furious. The letter denied that agents ever knowingly allowed suspicious guns to be trafficked. The retraction stoked speculation among lawmakers and other critics that there may be more the department is not revealing. Justice officials said that they relied on federal prosecutors and agents in Arizona in writing the letter. In a separate letter, in October, Holder wrote that he had no early knowledge of the Fast and Furious tactics and the misguided tactics should never be used again. Lawmakers should spend more time finding ways to stop illegal guns. On June 28, 2012, the Republican-led House voted 255 to 67 to find Holder in contempt of Congress, saying the Obama administration was withholding documents related to how it responded to the Fast and Furious scandal. Many Democrats refused to even cast votes and staged a walkout from the House floor, calling the vote politically motivated. In response, the Justice Department stated that it provided thousands of documents to the House and wanted to continue negotiating for access to more. The House filed a lawsuit asking a judge to order Holder to comply with a subpoena. Holder still refused. In a scapegoating mission on September 19, 2012, the Justice Department's Inspector General Michael Horowitz released a report faulting 14 department employees for systemic failures that led to the operation to go awry. Melson himself sat in his office on New York Avenue in mounting frustration. He watched Congress pummel his agency and ISA call for his resignation while he said he was instructed by justice to say nothing. Melson finally retired as a result, and Weinstein, the deputy in the department's criminal division, was reassigned but launched a counterattack claiming the Inspector General's report was inaccurate. He said he was singled out because of politicized congressional hearings. However, many in Mexico were less than pleased when the operation became public, such as Javier Cecilia, a Mexican poet, whose son was killed. He said, "Americans are not often moved by the pain of those outside their country, but they are moved by the pain of their own. Well, turn around and watch the massacres." What made it even worse was the provable fact that at least one ATF agent was directly involved in the transfer of weapons. On April 13, 2010, ATF agent John Dodson, with assistance from agents Casa and Alt, directed a cooperating straw purchaser to give 3 guns to Isaiah Fernandez, a suspected gun trafficker, and had taped the conversations without prosecutor approval. So how far up the Justice Department chain of command did this information go? How much, if anything, did Holder or Obama actually know? Holder was now deep in the scandal and facing impeachment and possible criminal charges if he were found to be involved, as opposed to his claims of ignorance. Holder convinced President Obama at that point to claim executive privilege over the remaining records. But Mark Rozelle, a professor at George Mason University and author of a book on executive privilege, stated that executive privilege exists so that the president should have the right to candid advice without fear of public exposure. A president discussing policies with his cabinet are to be held in privilege unless a law is broken. Unfortunately, executive privilege was not a valid position to take in this case. The presidential communications privilege applies to communications involving the president or his staff that immediately pertain to the president's decision-making process. Fast and Furious being illegal constitutionally would not have qualified for executive privilege. Deliberative process involves a broader scope of executive branch activity, discussions involving White House staff or within other agencies on legal or policy decisions that don't necessarily involve the president or his immediate advisors. Again, the argument is that government officials need to feel like they can talk honestly. The deliberative process privilege, Rozelle says, is generally easier to challenge than a claim of presidential communications privilege. However, lawmakers were not satisfied, and this is a brief series of the events that followed. On Friday, July 1, 2011, Grassley's chief investigator sent Melson an email alerting him to concerns of retaliation against the Group 7 agents. He gave Melson his cell phone number and told him to call any time. By Sunday, Melson told the investigator he was ready to testify. Melson sat in a private meeting with senators in the Rayburn building where he admitted that mistakes had been made by the ATF. He said guns should have been interdicted in certain instances, and he was frustrated that justice did not let him speak to Congress months earlier. He also said that justice officials seemed to be more concerned about protecting the political appointees at the top of the department. After Melson's testimony, Representative Darrell Issa and Senator Grassley wrote a 5-page letter embracing the ATF director and warning Holder not to fire or retaliate against him. Grassley and Issa again demanded the emails, internal memos, and handwritten notes of 12 justice officials who said they were in fact aware of Fast and Furious. Issa said, "I do have serious concerns that the Attorney General should have known a lot more than he says he knew. In some ways, I'm more disappointed that he's saying he didn't know than if he says he was getting briefings and he didn't understand." On March 22, 2011, President Obama appeared on Univision and spoke about the controversy. He said that neither he nor Attorney General Holder authorized Fast and Furious. He also stated, "There may be a situation here in which a serious mistake was made, and if that's the case, then we'll find out and we'll hold somebody accountable." From the reports, it became even more disturbing and complicated for Obama and Holder when, in April 2011, a large cache of weapons, 40 of them traced to Fast and Furious, but also including military-grade weapons difficult to obtain legally in the U.S. These included an anti-aircraft machine gun and grenade launcher, which was found in the home of Jose Antonio Torres Marufo, a prominent Sinaloa cartel member in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. Torres Marufo was indicted but evaded law enforcement for a brief time. Finally, on February 4, 2012, Marufo was arrested by the Mexican police. On May 3, 2011, Attorney General Holder testified to the House Judiciary Committee that he did not know who approved Fast and Furious, but that it was being investigated. He also stated that he probably heard about Fast and Furious for the first time over the last few weeks. That claim was later questioned, as explained below. In June 2011, ATF agent Vince Cephalou, who helped to publicize Fast and Furious, was served with termination papers in a move by the agency he described as politically motivated retaliation to cover their tracks. On June 14, 2011, Representative Issa and Senator Grassley released a report stating, "Agents were told to stand down rather than interdict weapons. They complained about the strategy and were ignored. And Fast and Furious led to increased violence and death in Mexico. Agents were panicked, certain that someone was going to die." On May 29, 2011, following a tip, 4 Mexican federal police helicopters attacked a cartel compound and were engaged by heavy fire, including from a .50 caliber Barrett sniper rifle. According to a report from the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, this rifle is likely linked to Fast and Furious. Part of the record states, on November 23, 2012, 2 firearms linked to the ATF were found at the scene of a shootout between Sinaloa cartel members and the Mexican military. One of the weapons was a Kalashnikov-style WASR-10 rifle trafficked by Fast and Furious suspect Uriel Patino, and the other was an FN Her-style pistol originally purchased by an ATF agent. Mexican beauty queen Maria Susana Flores Gamez and 4 others were killed. One of the 19 guns Mexican authorities said they found at the hideout of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman after his January 2016 capture was associated with the Fast and Furious operation. In a letter to congressional leaders, Assistant Attorney General Peter Kadzik, head of the Justice Department's Legislative Affairs Office, wrote, "ATF and the department deeply regret that firearms associated with Operation Fast and Furious have been used by criminals in the commission of violent crimes, particularly crimes resulting in the deaths of civilians and law enforcement officials." An additional 1,430 of these guns remain on the streets, and no one has ever really been held accountable. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.